It's just going to report right to the Telus.
All right, thanks very much. And thank you to the BC Aware contingent for having Telus participate. It's a great honor to be here. I'm Mike Vamvakaris, Director and Head of Cybersecurity Consulting, and I look forward to continuing the discussion and the journey of cybersecurity, threats, risks, and what does it mean in a digital communications or a transformation perspective. So today we're going to take a little bit of a different approach, and we're going to talk about holistic cybersecurity. I heard the keynote last night, and I heard this morning's keynotes. They were brilliant, and I thought, wow, I think we're onto something here. And hopefully this resonates with you all as well. So the premise is, the objective is to, if we come out of this successfully, you'll look at cybersecurity a little bit differently. Definitely a huge topic, but certainly not just about the outputs. I'll talk about that. Outputs being all the shiny bells and whistles. Someone called it a silver bullet or the shiny toys. So let's begin. You'll notice that I will do a quick recap, just not to belabor the point about cybersecurity being a risk. I think it's pretty obvious. I made a joke to my wife. If it wasn't a risk, probably none of us would be here. So we don't need to probably look at too many stats. But I will reinforce some trends as to why we need to look at cybersecurity holistically. So at Telus, obviously, we're in the business of interconnecting people from a digital economy perspective, both wireless, wireline, fiber, etc. So, we have a big play in this space, right? So we're out there enabling communication, collaboration, the concept of artificial intelligence, autonomous AI. Not a single day goes by where we don't hear about something like this in the general marketplace. And of course, Internet of Things. We heard a lot about that at this session, and we'll focus on that. So what does that actually mean? And are there threats from Internet of Things? You'll be surprised that most of them are actually not coming from the Internet of Things. So I'll just have a little segue there. So we know we're interconnecting the world, and just as a quick recap, we obviously know there's all kinds of new risks. And I think it's somewhat hopefully you can see that, it's somewhat clear there. We see 2017 as the year of ransomware. It really was. For the first time, 20% of organizations actually were down and out between, up to 5 hours to almost 2 days from an average perspective. They could not actually perform functions when they were hit with ransomware. And there was a big question, do you pay or not? And I think the output was very simple. It depends. There's no panacea. There's no right or wrong. If you take the approach that I don't pay, well, you're probably not going to get your data back. But today I'm going to offer a unique approach to suggest no matter what type of threat vector that comes upon us, if you do the basics, and we're going to talk about that, holistic approach to how to protect against some of these issues.
Yes, you have that quarter.
The other big key finding was that on average, it's taking us about 200 days. This is a US finding, and then I've actually brought a study here today that's actually at the Telus booth if you're interested. I'd love for you to stop by afterwards and pick that up. It was from IDC. We collaborated with them on an info brief. And collectively, it's about 200 days before an attack is actually detected in your network. So think about the damage that it can do. They're actually in your network. They're poking around. They probably have the keys to your LDAP and admin accounts. And once they get in, they can hop into jump servers and whatnot. And then you're pretty much done at that point. The key takeaway here is, as you learn about this model I'm going to present today, is you need a better way of detecting when people get in, but you also have to have an approach that defends from an incident response and also forensics. So what happens when they do get in? And the last statistic that I guess I'll talk about, the scare tactics that we all hear about in cybersecurity, is it's legit. I mean, it's costing, right? This is a big business now. And the reality is the average cost of cybersecurity incidents are just about, on a small scale, 100K to 5.7 Canadian. Now last night we saw the US figures. These are Canadian stats, and this is from Ponymon and IDC. So the bottom line here is the premises as we go forward is security is really no longer about an IT issue. I think you've probably heard that today, last night. It's probably you probably feel a bit beaten up, but I can't stress that enough. When we talk to clients abroad in Canada, they're like, Mike, well, you know what? I need to talk to my board. I need to talk to my C-level, my C-suite. And so it's apparent that this is no longer an IT issue, but it's a tolerance of risk. So it's a practice of risk and your risk tolerance. Now, why is this happening? So we do a quick recap here. So we know that this is an interesting slide. It seems like almost on every day of the week, there's a new threat surface or threat vector coming in the news, certainly. With the growing attack surface, we saw the number one in 2017 was the rise of ransomware. And it's not about now what happens to your data, it's how important is your data to get it back, right? So you have to be aware of, we'll talk about crown jewels in a minute. The other thing is the changing threats. In the last 2-3 years, we saw with WannaCry cyber exploits that have been weaponized. Regardless of how they got leaked out from the NSA, Eternal Blue, we're now seeing the weaponization of cyber exploits. And that is a changing world, and that's something that we're going to talk about, because you can't necessarily depend on technology to stop that. Of course, a vendor will probably talk to you about AI and deep learning neural networks, and we'll get to that. And these are going to be important into the framework I'm going to show today, but alone, they're not going to work for you. Number of vulnerabilities. What's old is new again. So what's happening now on midweek, you have an old variant that's been modified and basically repackaged to have, to deliver a new payload that will trick your antivirus from detecting it. The next set of technologies is a diverse landscape. We talk about defense in depth, but there's a nice slide chart that I have. I didn't bring it today. Is that if you threw up all the vendors, you have thousands of vendors promising panacea to try to take out all the complexities and all the threats we see. And that obviously, to the left, that obviously puts constraints in labor. It's hard to find skill sets. I've talked to lots of companies of various sizes, and the first thing they say is, Mike, we're a team of 11 IT people, 3 people are moonlighting, they're doing IT, they're doing security. I don't know where to put my limited resources and dollars. So this is a key finding that I'm going to share with you again, and this is actually in that IDC report we have for you today down the Telus booth. The key takeaway here, and this kind of sets up for the rest of the session, is business of cybercrime pays. Does anyone disagree? The thought here, though, is if it pays, they're taking money. To create value creation, whether you're doing it, if you're doing it legally or illegally, you're taking money, you're destroying brand, you're taking contacts, and you're exploiting them. So we know it pays, or they wouldn't be doing it. The question is, what are you going to do, and where are you going to spend your limited dollars to protect yourself? And today we're going to look at that. And just to hammer this home before we get started, I found this very interesting when we did our own research. The breaches continue to increase despite spending. So you might think, okay, Mike, you know what? My vendor came in and we're working with, and I'm not going to do I won't name drop vendors, but there's lots of out there, and some of them are really cool and they have the latest and greatest. But what's happening is they're not detecting their breaches, or they're still getting in. And so of 73% of organizations, year over year, there is an increase from spending. So we know the spending's going up, but despite that, and here's where it's really interesting, the breaches continued and they grew from 26% experience of breach of past year, up 5%. So it might be small, you might think, but the point is, as the money goes up, the breaches continue, and the level of quality of is diminishing. So we're not doing a good job, and you probably feel overwhelmed, overworked. I talked to a lot of people who say, well, Mike, we can't keep up, we don't have the talent. But I'm here to propose something today, is that security investments and the decisions are not aligned to the cyber threat. So you're thinking, what? What does that mean? So we're going to look at that. And before I do that, I had to put this up because everybody asks me, well, Mike, this is all going to go away. I was just at a customer site yesterday, and they're like, well, we're investing in a technology that has AI, deep learning. I talked about neural networks, big data, analytics. And I said, that's great. And what's your weakest link? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And how do you know where are you looking to put that emphasis on? And so I started talking to them, and I realized that the AI that they were acquiring for their SIM was just going to, well, not just, it was going to help operationalize and filter out some of the noise. So the incident responders, the level 1 SOC analyst, essentially could get to get to an incident response faster, filter out some of the noise, and then do something meaningful with an alert that's firing. So the key takeaway here is, when you hear about AI and you hear about deep learning and different algorithms, these are going to be technologies that are going to help you automate some of the low-hanging fruit or the noise, because we're collecting all kinds of logs, right? If you're using SIM or you're using firewalls, there's so much metadata that's coming at you that's unstructured, and you're like, oh my God, help me. So it's amazing. I find when I talk to clients, they think the rise of AI is going to make security better. And I'm here to say it's just an enabler. It's one of the outputs, and don't kid yourself. I'll take it one step further. Having seen this, and have been part of building SOC practices, as we automate our incident responses, as we take out the triage of cyber incidents to make it more meaningful, we're going to have to move our skilled labor up the stack. We're going to have to focus on threat analysis, threat hunting, incident response, and forensics. So if you think that your skilled labor is going to go away, I got bad news for you today. Take it to heart, all right? So the security specialists and analysts and architects, the demand is just going to increase. But we're going to use these net new technologies as a way to filter the noise and get us looking at more salient triggers and eliminating false positives. And I hope that makes sense. Now, before we start, it's imperative that you learn, I think, the fundamentals. I always start with this. Today, we're going to look at a framework, and I'll talk about what is a framework, right? It sounds very dry and complicated. It's actually pretty easy. But before you can do that, you have to look, it's like looking in the mirror. You have to understand your weakest link. This is paramount. And in some cases, it's usually, not to lead you, it's your security IT or the budget that you have, right? To procure new technologies, to work with a third party, to hire that gun out of school, that high-powered resource. And that could be your weakest link. Or you could have known fallacies where you think you're actually practicing what I'll talk about, good hygiene, deploying all the latest antivirus software at the desktops, but you haven't done any educational and awareness, right? So cyber awareness, the whole concept of social engineering, you haven't trained your employees what to look for, and so you're depending completely on the endpoints to filter out the threats. And those are just some examples. So we know that technology is only part of the answer. So, holistic approach to cybersecurity. The easiest way to understand holistic approach is something that I kind of draw a line in parallel to, I guess it would be allopathic medicine. Sometimes we go to the doctor, we don't know what's troubling us, and we have a symptom. And he sends you away with a prescription or something like that, and you come back. But it still persists. And next thing you know, that a month later you go back, they have another case finding, and all the time you may have had a gallstone, right, that was bothering you and that it needed to come out, and you usually get back pain, I believe. Now, if we were just to treat the pain, we would not look at the whole ecosystem. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's complicated in a way. We've heard about others talk about it, I believe. I heard some of the speakers. But today we're going to show you an actual model that can demystify and how you can actually do this for your organizations, or if you're a practitioner of cybersecurity, or you're just learning and you want to learn more. I would invite you to look at this. So an ecosystem really is a collection of people, process, and tools, not independent, but working together to understand all the different touch points that come into your security, your organization, from your partners, your customers, and suppliers. And it works with a framework, best practices, and guidelines to map out your risk. Okay, so this is really a conversation about risk. And so we're going to use a framework to look at that. Now, the framework that I'm going to be talking about here today is known as NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And I'm not, per se plugging the framework, but here at Telus, we actually use this framework to consult with our clients, but we're actually also using it internally. I'm going to show you some actually unique use cases and proof points as to how we're using that framework. So know that there's other frameworks out there. There's COBIT, there's ISO 27001, and these are all guidelines, best practices that you can use to get you into a better cybersecurity posture. The bottom line here is it's a governance model, and we're going to go through each one of these really quickly at a high level, but I'm going to talk about what the different parts of security fall in. For example, like a firewall. I talked about training, maybe SIM or UBA. They all flow into this ecosystem. What's not being really discussed is the importance of knowing this so you can have a continuous program and feedback loop so you can communicate to people when breaches happen. You can get executive level buy-in because you have educated the organization, right? Because a big challenge right now are security budgets, right? So if you don't know how to talk the security speak at a business lingo, big problem. And I heard that theme, and that resonates with me very well, because I started installing firewalls over 20 years ago but I mean, I moved up and did different things, and now I'm consulting and talking about best practices. So I'm very technical, but I need to be able to take those technical concepts and distill them into business risk, right? And that's why you need to look at a framework such as NIST. This framework actually came out of the presidential direction of Barack Obama in 2013, I believe. There was an infrastructure requirement to protect the U.S. national government. Cybersecurity threats were on the rise, and there's a lot of worry about all the organizations, specifically nuclear power and all the, the high-profile things that keep the economy and our societies going. And so I really do like this model, and I'll take you through it today to its importance and what it can do for you and your customers and your suppliers. So the first one is identify. So it's a 5-phase model: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. There's probably not that much new there. You've probably heard different people talk about these things, but it's important to understand that one no part can work on its own. They all have to work in unison. So identify is probably the most important thing before you get started. And the reason is you have to know what you're trying to protect. But more importantly, what is someone after and why? Okay, so I had a good conversation over lunch, and it was great because it reinforced that it makes a lot of sense. If you're a smaller company, you probably could get this pretty quickly. But if you're working in a big company like Telus, or even a mid-cap, insurance, brokerage, could be a bank, you're going to have all kinds of intrinsic data out there. So if you don't have a map and a schema to help quantify where your risks are, you're probably not spending those limited dollars properly, like we talked about earlier. So we talk about identifying your crown jewels. What is your impact? What is your dollar impact if you actually lost them? Could you operate your business for more than an hour a day? How long can you go? I mean, does anyone want to find out? I mean, it's a scary thought, right? So you have to put some really good due diligence into understanding. You almost have to think of it as a threat actor. You have to know your ecosystem, all your touch points, and who is going after your data. And then the risk on there is you need to start identifying these to reduce your attack surface. So the first action for identify is understanding where the most important data resides. Is it in the cloud? Do you even know? Do you care? Right? Is it in the edge? Is that the customer? Do you need to have PSI, DSS? Are you collecting credit cards? Right? Are you actually processing credit cards, and are you storing credit cards? Two different compliance requirements. So in the identify phase, you would use assessments. You could use TRAs, threat risk assessments. You can do maturity assessments, and you've heard probably by now to the different venues, vulnerability and pen tests. Well, this is what you do. Once you identify your assets, you want to create a baseline. You want to understand, okay, where are my exposures? So you're going to identify your crown jewels, and then you're quickly going to assess how secure you think you are. The next, and the piece, and then the way to do this actually tactically, because it could seem overwhelming, is you're not going to want to do everything, right? And that's probably the fallacy. I mean, if you talk to a vendor, not to pick up on the vendors, a lot of them are here, they're going to say you need to log everything, you got to monitor everything, Mike. You don't. If you're comfortable, if you're creating all kinds of noise and chatter, you're not going to want to log everything. I'll tell you, there's a law of diminishing return. If you're going to log everything, think of all the terabytes of data and storage you're going to need. What are you going to do after? You're going to go back, you talk about Boolean or Elasticsearch. You don't have enough horsepower to go back and through it. So you have to get really granular of what you're trying to do. So I'll leave you with that thought. And so what you want to do, and again, don't despair. We have almost a cheat sheet for you ready at the Telus booth that shows you how you can prioritize and create a ranking of priority, how to go about knowing what's important and what's not. Because you're not going to want to treat everything the same. You have a limited budget and you have limited resources. So this is really, you have to put a lot of time and focus on this one. Okay, so once you think you've identified your crown jewels, what's the most important to your business and what can you absolutely not do without to run and operate your business? This is obvious. Now it's time to protect that data and the uptime. But there's a fallacy here as well. This is where people think the big ticket spending comes in, right? DLP, NGN firewalls, SIM, big data analytics. We're going to use UBA. We're going to do everything. And the reality is, again, if you're just looking for a silver bullet, you will fail here miserably. The one big point, I'll cheat here and go ahead, is this came from an IDC report recently, and that in the protect space, Canadian organizations are spending $1.3 billion on cyber tools. What are they spending on training and awareness? $43 million. Absolutely nothing, right? And that really supports the premise of today's presentation. We're not spending our limited dollars in the right place. You know, I know there were other speakers today, and there'll always be, and I'll always drill this home to my partners and customers, is that you're not going to protect everything, and they're going to get in, and we'll talk about that. But the point here is you've got to protect all the points of weakness, okay, by layering technologies and humans oversight. So if you think you're not going to have, not allocated any budget essentially to, you know, an anti-phishing campaign or educational cyber awareness, it sounds, you know, rather bespoke or very tough. It can be, but this is where you'll need to get expertise if you don't have it in-house. But I can tell you, this is also what we call cyber hygiene. And 80% of all attacks can be filtered out right here in this model, right here. And I have all kinds of examples and cases if you'd like to talk to me afterwards where I can tell you, obviously without disclosing companies and that. But when companies practice good cyber hygiene, and just to talk about what that is having the right mix of antivirus, phishing, anti-phishing, anti-malware, having some endpoint, right? Having your SIM. But without the whole human intervention and training your users, this quadrant really falls apart. So take that to heart and know that cyber hygiene, a lot of people talk about that's where you have to really have patching, you have to have AV, absolutely. But without the layered approach of human element, you fail every time. So don't get caught by that one. Detect. Well, this one is interesting because this is where the attackers are getting in. And we're not doing the best job, obviously, right? We know that once they get in, their data exfiltration does not happen in one night or one day. They're taking payloads by the bytes, not the megabytes. They're taking unstructured data out very carefully. They're connecting with different protocols to make it look like it's a Facebook or a Twitter traffic, so you're not even understanding what is moving out of your organization. That's how sophisticated the threats are. So if you think you're just going to sit there with a firewall and hopefully run that into a SIM, you're in big trouble. You're going to need, and this is where AI can help, but you do need a dedicated team for doing 25 by 25. I made a new hour up. It should be 25 hours in a day. 24 by 7. And you know, we talk about glass on eyes on glass. Well, again, I'll be almost controversial. You do not want to be looking at everything. You'll fail. Your SOC analysts, or if you have them, are overwhelmed. I know that. I know many and have hired many in my career, and it's a very difficult space. The average SOC analyst can burn out, I think it's between 12 and 18 months. I mean, if you think of any one of us, it's a tough spot to be in, to look at all the feeds coming in and trying to correlate, right, everything. So this is an interesting space that you have to spend time on. So again, once you identify and you aggregate what's most important to you, then you get a right combo of human intervention and technology, okay? That's where you come in and you decide the logging mechanism that's best for you. And again, obviously, the most obvious, if you're not able to do this on your own, it doesn't mean you do it. It means you have to find out, either you're going to build it, buy it, but you're going to have to partner with someone and look at maybe some managed services, right? And there's lots of people who do that, obviously. The key takeaway here is in Canada, because we saw the national statistic, it's on average anywhere between a month and 1 year for Canadian organizations, and this recently just came out from the IDC, the time it takes for someone to realize that they've been hacked. And by that time, guess what? They've taken the crown jewels. It's too late. And that's the main premise, right? So you can't just do one thing here. It's a collaborative approach. While I'm saying you can't monitor everything, because if you do, your use cases are going to be firing. So these are the things that trigger your SIM. You're not going to be able to get eyes fast enough on that. So the action here is to understand that logging and monitoring is a big part of it, but not without a structured plan. Now, what happens with the inevitable? We heard a lot. I heard a lot of speakers say, and I feel very similar and passionate about this. It's not a matter of if, but when. But it almost sounds cliche, but we know that now. prior to a few years ago, we all know that there was all kinds. If you go down to even Canon Sector, if you go to RSA, I've been to those shows, feels like hundreds of times. Everyone's promising the latest and greatest. But how many people are telling you about, like I said, the basics, right? Are you prepared for when a breach happens, right? And do you have a proper incident response plan from a governance perspective? And this is the biggest one. Do you have a communication strategy? Forget about, we were talking about recover, but as soon as something happens, respond. Everyone from sales who's dealing with your clients, finance who may have had the ransomware, so they have to figure out if they're going to pay or what are they going to do, and how do you even do that, right? Because how do you go and pay someone in Bitcoin, right? If this happens to you, and all the way to PR. How are you controlling the damage of the brand potentially this is causing you? We saw what happened to Equifax. We've seen what happens to service providers, even in my own space. They have to have a very, very quick and dedicated team on these types of threats when they come out. So communication is paramount. You literally have to assign roles and responsibilities in your response plan, okay? So that's the first part. Now, just as important, because you want to be able to communicate internally and externally, is you don't want the threat to be lingering. So you need to contaminate and eradicate it. Whether it took you 10 days or 15 or it's okay, because I'm going to show you a model how you're going to get better in a second. And you kind of get it right now because you're going to be challenging yourself. And that's why this is an ecosystem. You're not doing one thing and forgetting about it. You're going to actually, what I say, fall on the sword. You're going to document your failures, right? And you're going to learn from your mistakes, and you're going to get better at it. And you're actually going to communicate to your executive board or your director of IT, whoever you need to show them how you're creating value. Now that's something I talk about a lot about. Because when I meet C-suites, they're saying, well, Mike, we meet vendors, we meet all kinds of guys, everyone's coming through here. How do I show my board value? My IT guys are coming to me and asking me for bigger budgets, more speeds and feeds, more terabytes of data they need to correlate. They want to use, there's lots of buzzwords and technologies. How do I communicate? And this is how you do it right here. You show them that you have an active incident response plan. You say that through the difference, we've identified our threats, okay? We've done our crown jewels. We have a mixed strategy of technology and people process tools, and now we're logging. We're not logging everything, but we think we're doing the right thing because this is what our analysis, right? We've created a priority list, and we got our crown jewels in place. But by the way, when things do hit the fan, as they say, we're ready. And not only are we going to communicate, we're also going to baseline the business, right? Create a baseline of what happened. And then you're going to put that into your feedback loop so you can get better. So if you know you got licked or burnt on patching, patching's hilarious, right? Patching, you know one's going to be a rock star for patching. It's got to be the most boring. Anyone done patching? I have to ask. It's tough. I've done patching on firewalls and not. It's not glamorous, right? I've done that. I used to install firewalls and routers and all the rest of it. But you have to do it. And so this is going to allow you to create that baseline we talked about. So obviously you want to cordon off the attack. You want to reduce the damage as much as you can, clean the compromised system, and then what's most important is the recovery, right? And so it's so paramount after you've communicated what's happened. Like I talked about falling on the sword, it's okay. But having a plan of action is what this is all about, and communicating to your stakeholders and really your executive team. Now recover. It's so paramount that you don't waste too much time on this. Most people approach this that it's not going to happen to me. And imagine if you haven't identified those crown jewels or you were intimate with the business that you're operating. It sounds crazy, but again, this job I'm in allows me to meet all kinds of different players and customers, and it happens. They just didn't understand, or they were protecting the wrong assets, and they didn't understand what was valuable, or when it goes missing, how long it would take to get back. So here is where you have your I would suggest, offsite backups, cloud services. Everybody in this space should be akin, understanding IT. So have a very good documented procedure of what you're doing to protect and safeguard your data. And probably the most important, if not last, this is just second to none, test, test, and test. I've talked about that, and this is how you get better, okay? So we're just scratching the surface. Again, there's a cheat sheet downstairs with Telus, and I invite you to look at it. And we'll talk about a little bit now about Telus, but this only works if you're open and honest. So that's why I talked about it. You have to do your early crown jewel assessment. use your third party. You don't want to have someone in there and do your own assessment. It's like the fox watching the hen house, right? You want to have a third party or someone that's outside of your organization watching for that. And once that's done, you can actually get better at what you're doing. So the whole concept here is these 5 processes working together are a lot more stronger than any sum of one part, right? Now, considerations. We've talked about this real quick. If you find this too complex and scary, it probably is. It's kind of the findings I hear. People say, Mike, what can I do? Well, the first thing to do is know that, you have to have, there's this misnomer of IT and security. Well, they're blended, right? Now we're interchanging them. And everybody has staff that are doing both. So I would look for folks that have an IT focus themselves if you're looking at getting third-party help. If you're out there working for the providers but don't have an IT discipline or a focus in practicing best practices, that's something to work for and look for. If you're going to also look with third parties, ask them about relationship management, right? The more you can consolidate. There are so many disparate things in this ecosystem that I showed today, right? You're not going to be able to go to one vendor. I mean, I'm not going to pick on Cisco's here. It could be anyone. Or it could be Intel. I used to work for Intel. You're not going to get everything from one vendor. It's impossible. They're going to tell you, oh, we can do multi-tenant with one. We can aggregate everything to one console. It sounds good, but it's not going to happen. So ask about relation management, right? How are they working with all the different vendors? How are they adding value? That's so key. The selection and buying criteria. SLAs, right? How are they going to step up to protect you? If you're going to outsource some of those crown jewels for someone to do the MDR, Managed Detect Response is what it's called, you have to make sure that they have a robust, with critical mass, SOC level 1 through 3, if it's SOC services, or anything else that might plug into that via threat analytics and big data clusters, you need to make sure that the SLAs they give you match your requirements for the model we just talked about. There's no point going to a third party and then they're not giving you an SLA to respond back to your executive team. That's failure. That's disaster. I've seen that happen. It's not pretty, right? And then there's a whole pushing, right? You have to communicate. They become an extension of your team, right? This team is really your team in the middle of the night if something bad happens. Data residency is a big one. Don't get caught up by that one. If you're a Canadian entity, make sure your data, the big one I hear is like, Mike, I don't know where my data is. We're using Azure or AWS. And then I say, well, really, what for? And then you find out they're a credit union and they have OFSFI compliance or something like that. And they're, there's data sovereignty, data residency, and they're in violation right away. So look for that. So if you have these issues, make sure you're working with the provider that is local to Canada or the US or the UK, right? Now, I'm going to spend a couple minutes here, so I want to open up some questions at the end. Real quickly, we don't just talk about security, but we practice what we preach. Inside Telus, I thought you'd find this interesting, as one of the biggest employers in British Columbia and Western Canada, Telus uses a NIST framework. So we actually do this. Now, I don't have the vendor technologies per se, but I showed you from a schema perspective here of all the different things we do in this 5-phase model and program. So you'll see at the front, we've identified our crown jewels. We're using GRC. We're actually PCI DSS compliant because we have all kinds of credit card information that our companies are using over our wireless and data networks. So not many people realize that. So we have to do PCI DSS. So we have QSAs that are authorized that come in and they have certifications to do that. We do compliance management. We do vulnerability scanning. And this is where I talk about falling on the sword. We score ourselves, right? And we're also working with a third party to do that. Again, you can't have, like I talked about, the fox watching the hen house. So that's what happens up Identify. Protect, you can read all the different we have probably more technologies in the Telus backbone than anyone or any large national provider, right? And it's really cool to see all the technologies, and I have access to that. We have a DevSecOps team. We collaborate, we understand, and it makes us sharpen our pencil every day. But that's where Protect goes. But I'll tell you, when I first joined Telus, I've never seen a company on the internal intranet do such a fantastic job of doing cybersecurity awareness, right? We spend thousands, millions of dollars on educating our users. So they're not that weakest link in the chain I showed a few slides ago, right? 80% of threats can get taken out by good hygiene when you combine antivirus, the basics, and cyber awareness training, and that's in Protect. The tech we talked about, that's your MDR or your SIM, the event correlational analysis, threat intelligence. We constantly test for that. And I'll talk about a little bit in a second. But the other one is the response, right? We have a massive incident response plan with governance in place, with stakeholders that are identified and tracked, that are reviewed on a quarterly basis, all the way to the CISO. In my case, who I report to, who reports up to the C-suite. And this is part of our job, is to make sure that we have an evolution, a continuous cycle, that when things do happen at Telus, because their chances are they're going to happen. I won't name drop. You saw there was a service provider in the news not too long ago, right? One of our competitors. It happens. But I think they did a pretty good job of how they responded, to be honest. Right? And that's because they have a framework in place, and they're able to do something about it and make their customers feel at ease. Now, you're probably upset when you heard that, but I'm sure you're happy at least they didn't deny it, right? In some cases, some people do, and that was that earlier slide. I said, whatever you do, do not spend too much time wasting time on your PR strategy, because you can actually make the cyber incident, make it look a lot worse than it actually is. And that's a very good point, I think. Now, in Telus, just a couple of proof points before we open it up. We actually take the framework, but we have to model in a little bit for our uniqueness. We have massive amounts of terabytes of data, unstructured data. We have, in the first one, cybersecurity analytics. So in that detect cluster, we have our own Hadoop clusters, right, for unstructured data that comes in, that we work with third-party threat feeds that come in from around the world, and also do correlation analysis. But the key point here is, don't just wait to have a threat feed come in from a third party from somewhere around the world. Why would that matter? What's the exploit happening on the network today, right? And that's why having some intelligence on your network. And we do that. We have our own, like I said, our own clusters, our own Hadoop clusters, our big data engines that work with the SIMs to aggregate the data and work with third party. We pull the telemetry off of our network, and we actually have really in real time our own threat feed across the Telus backplane. So that's really cool. And that's unique to Telus. So also we've deployed a secure by design, and this is the whole thing DevSecOps. So before Telus, how many people are on a Telus network today? I'm curious. A few people? I know I am, right? Before Telus actually puts any service or device on the network, or an app, we have a program called Secure by Design. And this essentially allows us to build in security before something bad happens or an afterthought. Now, I can tell you, I know the director who does this, and a lot of my colleagues on the product sales team probably think he's a big pain in the ass, right? Because think about it, he wants to build security into each and every net new service that comes on the wireless network or the wireline network. But this is a commitment we made to reduce our risk. Now, this is akin to DevSecOps and understanding how your teams work in a security environment, and this is something that we've baked into everything we do on the Telus network. And last but not least, we talked about identify governance, risk, and compliance. This is huge for us. It's so critical with critical 911 services, a national fiber optic and wireless network. We cannot have downtime at all. So we're continually, openly, and subjectively working with third parties to assess how good we are, right? Without apology. We have no choice but to do that. And that's where that last feedback loop comes in and helps us really get better, right? And now the same experience that we do here in Telus, I'm here to tell you that if you come downstairs, we actually get you started. We do have some of that, because I know this sounds kind of confusing, but what we've come up with is a bundle that actually helps you get started. So if it's something that's interesting or you don't know what to get started, the very least, there's a white paper that you can get. It's easy to sign up for it, and that'll help you. It goes into actually more detail. I just don't have enough time to talk about how you can use a NIST or a framework model to kind of get you organized and sell this to your executive team as to why it's not about, we talk about speeds or feeds or technologies. It's about a holistic end program working all together. So I invite you to come and see us. And these are tailored programs, depending if you're in financial services or healthcare. There's different integrated bundles that we can put together for you. So some final thoughts, and then I'll open it up. I think we have a few minutes here. The one thing I would like to say is, and leave on an impression is, security is no longer an IT issue, right? It's about quantifying risk. It's what is your risk profile? What is your risk tolerance? And so you have to be able to quantify your risk. We know earlier in this presentation that it's not hackers. I mean, you guys know there's state actors, there's hacktivists, there's political activists. I didn't even get into that. Whole different conversation.
I'm really focusing on the issue of business crime using cyber exploits. We know what's happening. We saw the statistics. So if you know that the bad guy's spending millions of dollars now to try to get your data, why wouldn't you spend that type of passion, if not dollars, but refocus them into a framework to help you get organized? So that's the big point. It's also not about, it's also about enabling innovation. The keynote this morning was brilliant. I think it was called Zipline, Delivering the Medicine, right, in Rwanda. How cool was that? It was amazing. And I love that, because that's kind of what I always say, is enable innovation. It's not this doomsday story. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, what we're doing now with technology, and it really is about enabling, but yes, the unfortunate is you have to put some thought into securing the services that you're offering. When you're enabling, you're making something better in society. When we're doing digital transformation, we want things to get better and not worse. So it's upon us to take that obviously very seriously. And then the last one here is the technology alone will not make you secure. I think this one we have to just accept, right? We know that. If you're going to spend all your dollars on the next, you go down to like the Moscone Center or wherever in San Francisco once a year and you find out what they're doing. I did that for years. You come out of it, there's something to replace your Palo Alto, your Checkpoint. Again, pardon the name dropping, you're going to fail. You're going to fail miserably. And in that one, keep in mind your employees, right, is the next point here. We talked about identify, protect. Your employees can be your weakest link, right, in most cases, but there can be your biggest defense. I kid you not. When we go in and we work with companies and we build cybersecurity training and awareness programs, and we do it right from the ground up, and we literally train the trainer with materials in hand, you can see percents drop all the way from 50 to 80%. People just don't click on exploits. They don't come. You don't even have to deploy the latest anti-phishing campaign or a software. But it's amazing what happens when you educate your frontline employees. This sounds so basic. It's probably the best tip anyone can give anyone. Are your users aware? They might hate to hear from you, but pound it in their head, because they can take out 80% of all the exploits. And then last, to wrap it all up, I always say do the basics. It's really not about, there is no panacea, there is no silver bullet. The basics is, again, identify why are they after your data. If you don't know, then you got to find out quickly. Understand why the data they're looking for is a value, right? Do the basics, cyber hygiene, right? A combination of human intervention and technology. Monitor. If you can't do that by yourself, right? If you don't know what a use case is or how to filter and parse data out of Splunk or Logarithm or all kinds of that, work with a third party. Do your due diligence, accept the fact that you need help. And then last, most important, it's preparing for when crisis strikes. This is probably the most important that people forget. Remember, the communication plan is second to none. You're going to get ranked and rated on your ability to recover your company's data and communicate to your internal and external stakeholders. So take that to heart. And with that in mind, I would like to thank you for the opportunity. Hope this has been of value. Again, come please visit us downstairs, and we'll be happy to give you a cheat sheet of today's presentation. Thanks for your time, and if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you. Yeah, sure. I don't have a mic, so I'll repeat your question, I guess. There you go.
Yeah, I recently arrived from the United Kingdom, and it's just going back to your slides earlier. The GCHQ in the UK launched a campaign a year ago to improve awareness of information security in the United Kingdom. And they looked at it the other way. They went back to basics. They said the biggest threat and the biggest asset in a company is its own employees. So they launched a massive campaign and encouraged every organization in the UK to train their employees from a security mindset, make them more aware from the security mindset, like things like not clicking on attachments and stuff like that. Exactly, yeah. They actually went the other way. They disregarded investing on technology. They said that's just...
Yeah, they did away with it completely. Interesting.
My question was, going back to the other slide, it's interesting to see it here that you mentioned in your slide is the other way around, where companies are spending massive amount of money on technology and not on user training. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on that. Why is that happening? Why are they not concentrating on training their employees? Because that will save them money. If their employees don't click on things, they don't have to buy that $30 million software to safeguard them against the...
I don't know if we're just behind the times here. It's great to hear that. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I do have an opinion. I think we've been bombarded a false sense of security, to be honest. I think we've had the one and done model for a long time, right? The silver bullet.
And it's going to get even more dangerous with GDPR
Absolutely.
coming in May. And that, if any Canadian company is dealing with the European data, there's going to be more emphasis on that. So I just wondered why the difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like from my perspective, I can't believe the amount of lack of awareness that goes on, and I think that's when I focused on that. I kept hammering that home that 80% really starts with you, the front line. So it's great feedback.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I know we're running out of time, and I know you have to get to your next venue. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the show.